My research process before taking this class is very similar to how it was by the end of this class. The reason why is because I have taken an honors section of Composition 1 with Bonnie before, and most of the ideas shared in that class were repeated here. So basically, I would find a topic that interests me, look at papers that form an understanding for me of what is known so far, fish out any sources that may not be credible, and look for any perspectives that the sources I've chosen may have missed in order to find a research topic. Those missing perspectives would serve as prime material for me to gather data and give an answer from that said perspective. As for what I've learned about the research process from this class, again, since much of what was shared in this class was taught to me by Bonnie before, this class was more of a refresher of things that I've already learned. One thing that I did do during my research process that was new was showing the problem more directly with my videos, and I got to do that using gameplay footage. In my first video blog, I talk about some ways that video games require some sort of literacy from the player and demonstrate how demanding video games are to players when it comes to how they interpret information, both through text and through the level design, with my own gameplay. I use this to demonstrate the lack of inclusion of games in educational settings and why that is a problem before starting with the rest of the research process. It shows that I've grown comfortable using what I'm familiar with as part of my research process. As for how this could be applicable for future learning and work environments, I work in computer science, and being the first to describe a problem and letting other people know what that problem is something that happens all the time when researching in theoretical computer science. And I will have to do that with the best of my ability if I decide to work in that sector. So, my process for integrating sources into my writing before this class is very similar to by the end of the last class I took with Bonnie. I learned to treat my sources as claims that I can dispute. And one way that I feel like my process for integrating sources has developed was that I was much more critical of my sources this semester. I was much more focused on pointing out what the writer hasn't done that would have made for a stronger case, or sought missing perspectives from the authors in my sources. An example in which I do that is the vlog where I talk about the gaps in my sources. And I do that by pointing each of them out and stating my research question based on those gaps. One way that all of this can be applied in a future work or learning situation is that in engineering, figuring out ways that the last iteration of a product can be, or finding out ways that something that already exists can be improved is something that is done extremely often. And it's something that needs to be done, keep progressing as a species, uh, especially when it comes to computers. Just look at how fast processing has become over the past 2 decades. There's always work to be done and ways to make most things better if you think hard enough. So, learning with peers. My process for learning with peers before my class, I didn't really interact with peers very much aside from feedback sessions. Even in Bonnie's Comp 1 class, I feel like I worked with myself a little bit more than I did in this class. In this class, I sought the viewpoints of other classmates more because when I was in a group and I needed to talk about what the thing that we read, whatever we were assigned, was about, whatever I thought wasn't enough. I needed other perspectives in order to really flesh it out and have a detailed understanding as to what the reading we were assigned was about. An example of this was when I was group leader for one of the reading exams, and I went out of my way to encourage my group to talk about the reading. And the reason why I think that is important is because having a diversity in viewpoints is important. There are things that people would notice that I definitely would not have, because everyone is unique. Everyone has their own unique experiences. And this is heavily applicable in programming, especially in the open source community, where that sort of diversity is encouraged and is thought to lead to the creation of very good quality code, because you have people from all sorts of backgrounds working on the same code and seeking different things out of it at the same time, which is part of the reason why it's such a successful model nowadays. So, my feedback process before engaging in this class, I was never really the best at it. Whenever someone will walk up to me for feedback, I would never have that great of an understanding as to what they want from me. Even with Bonnie's Comp 1 class, I feel like I was kind of guilty of that. And in this environment, I feel like I was able to understand the students' needs much better than I was before, because I was actually able to see what they were working on. And a good example of this was when I gave feedback on the session where we showed our rough drafts. And in that session, there was one student that seemed to be torn as to how they should present their final draft, whether they should do it through Instagram or through YouTube. And they did a podcast, but Instagram's not really suitable for releasing a long form video. And they were like, "Oh, should I post clips of the podcast onto Instagram, or should I just upload the whole podcast to YouTube?" And I just told them, up upload like key clips that really stand out from your podcast onto Instagram, and upload the full podcast to YouTube. And the reason why I came to that conclusion was because of how much I'd been on the internet over the past few years and being familiar with that sort of content creation. As for uh, how this could be applied to a future work or learning situation, again, programming is a very collaborative effort. Every time you are supposed to push code into the main branch, somebody else has to look at it. And if I was the owner of certain piece of code that is worked on by a larger team, I would have to look at that code and give feedback on what they missed, on some potential changes that they could make, and I would also have to go on a bit of back and forth with other team members as to what would be the best solution at the same time. So this is something that it is good for me to be better at. So the secondary source post. Um, the secondary source post was is very similar to how it was after I made the revisions. I feel like I got a lot of stuff right, even though uh, I could retake the videos, audio, and come up with some more clever editing tricks. I don't that would just make it an entire remake, and that's not what I was going for. And the reason why I feel this way is that I I describe what the sources claim. I described the gaps that the sources had right from the get-go because I was using techniques from of evaluating sources back when I took Comp 1 with Bonnie. I was also comparing what was said in the sources to my own shared experiences and even describing personal examples using my own gameplay. The level design implicitly tells you to walk up to the tutorials and walk away from the dead end where you started. You're often given an obstacle to overcome by using what you just learned. For example, you're given an undead to kill after learning how to attack. You get a shield as an undead is shooting arrows at you, and you have to block them in order to reach it without getting hit. You're taught to roll, and as you're climbing a set of stairs, a giant ball rolls down for you to dodge. The only difference between the newer version of the video and the old version of the video is I made the music a bit softer so my voice can be heard more clearly. I also fixed a really bad editing mistake where a gameplay clip at the end of the video was not showing. So the video is now slightly more watchable. So, uh, an example of how the revised post is written with authority is that by playing the game and talking about video games, as well as my own personal experience, I'm presenting with some authority. And one thing that I've learned from writing the creation process is that the graphics card that I was using was not suitable for some of the stuff that I wanted to do with it. It stopped working the way that it should as I was trying to run Overwatch to capture footage. So I had to come up with examples that an average viewer can understand with hardware limitations. As to how this can be applied in a future work situation, uh, when I do a pull request in my internship, uh, I've half it is inevitable that I'll have to make revisions to my code all the time. So making minor changes to that post is like a less extreme version of doing just that. So, for the sixth part, I decided to do a minor revision to the YouTube post for the final video. And the reason why I did that was that there wasn't a link to the video in the description where I brought up the legality of emulation. And there was no card for the part two video that I made after having brought it up there. And I should do that, especially if a viewer just so happened to jump into that video right as their first one, even though they shouldn't. So the post is mostly the same, but slightly more accessible to other people that have not watched the previous ones before. Uh, the reason why I feel like the revised post meets the required expectations despite that is that I already presented my revised research question. I presented my research tool, the interview, which is the interview. I presented my results, my final answer, along with the action that I want them to take, which is making gaming more accessible either through emulation or making the hardware more accessible to students. And one thing that I took out of it is that I learned how to make the information that I present easy and to understand and digestible for other people. And one thing I learned is that I was able to do this with my video editing and even able to go out of my way to be kind of entertaining and funny, especially with that one example that I used of how people in the melee community talk and how that would be completely inaccessible to somebody who does not play Smash Brothers Melee. Um, and in any other instance that I get the freedom to do a multimedia project for uh for an assignment, I would probably edit a video again. That would be the future learning experience that this all this can be applied to. As for the last part, something that was impactful that I learned in this class that I haven't talked about in this final yet, and that is managing all this work remotely. Before this class, I've literally failed Andrew Hollinger's section last semester. And that's a little bit embarrassing to say that, especially given who is going to be watching this video. It wasn't because the work was difficult and incomprehensible. I was just at a really rough place mentally at the time and had a hard time managing classes online. I feel like I did a way better job holding up this semester, and I really hope the semester goes easier on me. I'm a little worried that I'll have to take all my classes online again because of the Omicron variant spreading to the US, but I was able to turn all the work in this semester, and somehow I'm passing with an A as I work on this outline. So hopefully it'll be easier next semester to do online classes if it does get bad to the point where we lock down again. So, yeah, that's my video. Catch you later, Bonnie. Hopefully. Who knows? Bye bye.